Testing. In about 5 minutes or so, we'll gather back in the sanctuary to have a conversation with Mel Lehman. So you can do what you need to do, and then let's reconvene here in the sanctuary. About 5 minutes. Working yet? Hello? Should we test this? Yeah, now I'm hearing it. Okay. Testing. Well, welcome to you all. I said 10:40. It's a little past that, but you're certainly welcome to join us whenever. We don't have a lot of structure for this time. Hopefully you can hear me okay. But wanted to give an opportunity for Mel to talk some about his organization, Common Humanity, and he has many life experiences, as he referenced in his sermon, and so I'm sure he'd be happy to share about those too. So be thinking about questions throughout. Elaine is here with a mic, and she's happy to bring a mic around. So I'd say, if you have a question or a comment at any point, raise your hand, and she'll be happy to bring the mic. But yeah, this is going to be kind of an informal time just to hear from Mel and have a conversation about his work as a peacemaker and the various experiences and the organization that he directs in order to promote peace, particularly with people in the Middle East, in the Muslim world. So, hand it over to you, Mel. You don't have to.
I'll try with my mask on. If it becomes a problem, we can take my mask off. But at this point, respect everyone. I would be happy to continue on, but I would welcome some questions at this point to see.
Is it working? Does he need to get a little closer? Maybe you just want to hold it.
Okay. Yeah. So I would welcome. I'll be glad. I have some notes here to continue our discussion, but I would be very glad to hear some questions that folks might have, and that might be a good way to get started. Are some questions you might have, or there's folks here like Nathan who's been in the Middle East, and I would welcome a contribution, have a collective discussion about these matters. A question to get us started. Well, while you're thinking of your questions, let me offer a few additional comments. I think what we didn't get to during the sermon was ways to become peacemakers. So I would like to offer some thoughts about peacemaking, practical things that we might do. I think first of all is to get additional information besides the news media. Our news media, we think of it as unbiased, but it does have a point of view, and it's the American point of view. So I would urge you to spend some time as looking at other points of view. You can get that from right here, from Nathan. Nathan is somebody who's been there. So you turn on your TV, and there's somebody with great studio lighting and makeup, and they got their suit and tie, and they look like they know what they're talking about. Well, they do, but Nathan has been there. So talk to Nathan. Get different points of view on the Middle East. There are other people in our community who have been to the Middle East. Also, by way of news, I would suggest you consider Al Jazeera. Take some time to get a slightly different point of view than just what our American, and BBC doesn't quite do it either. BBC World News is helpful, but it's not completely gives you another perspective. So I would urge you to consider Al Jazeera. Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper, is also a very good website. So I would, first of all, say, where do we get our information? And I think we have to realize that much of our information is slanted towards telling the American point of view. There are many other groups. Christian Peacemakers, wonderful group to give us additional points of view. Bethlehem Bible College is sort of in our part of the Christian world. Their Mennonite involvement with Bethlehem Bible College. Sabil, which is another. There are many wonderful groups in the Middle East, Christian groups, which can give us some great perspective from the Christian point of view. So I think we should turn to other sources of information besides just the American news media, and we should pay more attention to Christians in the Middle East. On the trip to the Middle East, in which I described today, my third trip to Iraq, before I left, I said to people in my church, please send me an email. I'll be eager to hear from me. 20 years ago, email was still a little bit newer than it is now. So I gave them the address mecc.org, Middle East Council of Churches.org, mecc.org. And I got back, and one of my dear friends from church said, did you get my emails? And I said, no, I didn't get a single one. He said, well, I sent them to mecca.org. He was under the misunderstanding that there was a typographical error in what I had left. Surely I had left out the A. So if it was the Middle East, he assumed I left out the A by mistake, and he was writing to Mecca, mel@mecca.org. I never got it, as opposed to. So there are Christians in the Middle East, and I think we should be paying much more attention to what they are saying. It's a good source of understanding the area better.
I wouldn't mind just hearing a brief overview of common humanity and, what are some of the main areas that you focus on, and particularly art. I talked about that in the children's time, but that seems like an interesting way to approach peacemaking, and so I'm curious how you got into that, and what are some other aspects. Your group did come, I think, in 2016 here
Yes.
at Bethel. And had artwork in the gallery, and so some of you might be familiar with that from back then. But I'd be interested in more.
Yes, thank you for that invitation. Yes, we were at the Regier Gallery.
Regier.
In 2016, and time slips away. That's already 5 years ago. My goodness. We were here in Kansas, and we had exhibits at Wichita State University. And we had an exhibit at a school on the east side of Wichita. I forget the name of the school. And we were in Old Town, so we had exhibits. Basically how I got to, if you look at your bulletin, you will see the front is to my mind, a very beautiful picture. It's by one of the artists that we work with. His name is Khalid Al-Ani, and he is an Iraqi refugee. The way I got to work with Common Humanity, I made over the time some 6 or 7 trips to Iraq. I described one of them. And the next to the last trip I made to Iraq was in December of 2002, just before the invasion. And I had enough experience and enough contacts that I actually took a team of doctors. We took a team of doctors to Iraq in 2002 December, and you could sort of feel the war coming. And I kept thinking, if we sing enough songs and we protest enough, we can stop this, but we couldn't. But we were there in 2002 with a team of doctors, and Iraq had been so hurt by the sanctions. This is the issue. You remember perhaps the terrible economic sanctions which were imposed upon Iraq. And remind me to get to Syria, because what's happening right now is happened then. What's happening in Syria happened then, and we got to get on the case of Syria. Remind me, I have it in my notes here. But so the economic sanctions were killing the children of Iraq. In an infamous 60 Minutes interview, Leslie Stahl, the correspondent for 60 Minutes, asked then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, what's going on with the sanctions in Iraq? We hear from UNICEF that there were nearly 500,000 Iraqi children died because of the sanctions. Is it really worth the cost? And Ms. Albright said, yes, we think it is worth the cost. I guess that's what government officials have to do. But that is what she said. And many, many children did die. So I went back to Iraq right after the invasion on my own without any doctors. I felt this is not a time to take people. Let me see what the situation is like. And it was terrible. I was there in Iraq first week of July 2003, and I said, this is just not the place where I can bring doctors. This is just disintegrating into clearly it was the mess that we're in now. But my heart was still with the Iraqis. So through some contacts that I had, I went to Damascus and took 2 teams of doctors to Damascus in 2005, 2006. And while there, a good place to take your delegation is to the UN Refugee Office. So we would always go to the UN Refugee Office in Damascus, and I went to the head of the information office and saw these beautiful paintings on her wall. And she made a very simple point. There were 1 million Iraqi refugees who fled to Syria back in the mid-2000s, 2004, 2005, 2006. And amongst those 1 million refugees, there were several dozen professional artists, and they were suddenly out of work. They had a going career with exhibits in the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia, but they were suddenly thrown out of work, and they were with the mass of refugees. So we began bringing their art, and we've been bringing their art ever since. The pandemic has thrown a proverbial monkey wrench into our exhibit. We are a 501c3. We have a board of directors. At our last meeting, we said, let's look towards reopening our exhibits. Our exhibits are our bread and butter. It's what keeps us going. We go to churches. We were here in 2016. We've been to Mennonite churches. We've been to Lancaster. We've been to Presbyterians up in whatever. Several dozen of these by now. And it's our bread and butter, but the pandemic has suddenly put us back. So we talked as a board about beginning our exhibits again, but still doesn't quite people feel comfortable. And I don't feel comfortable with being part of, making people ill. So we haven't quite regained our in-person exhibits. What we have done are Zoom peace channels. So if you see the flyers there, you'll see the top page is our website. You can go to our website, commonhumanity.org, and you'll see the beautiful posters. We're selling posters. We're selling note cards. And the second page are the peace interviews that we've done. We're locked up in our pandemic days a year ago, and we started doing interviews. So we have some very unusual interviews there with Iraqi artists. We have some interviews with Doug Hostetter. Doug Hostetter, a Peacemaker, you might know the name, had an article on the front page of Anabaptist World about a month ago. We interviewed Doug about his work in Iran and Vietnam. So we expect to continue that in October with someone from here in Newton, who is a survivor of the Nakba, the catastrophe that the Palestinians experienced. So that is the work that we're doing, and we look forward to continuing that. I'd like to throw out a couple of additional peacemaking ideas. One is this being an academic community, I assume a good number of us here are related to academia. I would offer you a call to look into the situation in Syria. The situation in Syria is dreadful. And if you turn on, again, if the only source of your information about the world is those 4 minutes at the beginning of the evening news and the headlines, you probably missed the catastrophe that's happening in Syria. And I have a very alternate point of view of the crisis in Syria. I would invite you to use your academic skills, your curiosity about the world, and spend some time looking at the situation in Syria. There are doctors in Wichita who are Syrian doctors, and I don't have close ties, but I think those are ties which we could activate and get tied into. So the situation in Syria is dreadful. It is not being covered very well at all in our news media, and it makes for an intriguing intellectual adventure to get to know the situation better. There are news sources aside from our own, and to learn about the sad events that are happening here. Again, if there are questions that folks would like to jump in with a question, I'd be more than happy to take some questions. Let me offer some more ideas for peacemaking. I think that we should have discussions as Mennonites with two groups of people. Well, any number of people, but two people stand out for me right now. One is, I think we should make a special effort to have a discussion with Muslims. I think there's something in the Mennonite spirit which resonates with the Muslim world. That's something I've often heard mentioned. There's something of the values that we hold as Mennonites, the values of kindness and tenderness and gentleness. These really are the values of the Muslim world. We have been terribly misinformed by mass media about we've been put fear in us about the Islamic world and Islamophobia, and we see the worst of that world. It's certainly not a perfect world, but we've been shown the worst, that we've not shown the vast amount of good and kindness that's in the Islamic world. So I would urge you, no budget needed except for gasoline to drive down to Wichita. I'm sure there's an Islamic center there. I think they would be very welcoming and open, and we could have some wonderful discussions about Christianity and about Islam, and we could learn so much and build so many bridges. I don't think the war on terror, the endless war has quite ended yet. I think it's still, there's still, do they say it here in New York? We say we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Meaning in apartment buildings, somebody's taking off their shoes, you hear one shoe drop, and then you live in the apartment underneath, you can hear the other shoe drop. I think we're waiting for the other shoe to drop in this war on terror. I don't think it's over yet. Iran, I was going to recommend to you that you visit presstv.org. I checked it this morning before coming here. Unfortunately, it has been silenced by the United States government. There was a really good live TV channel you get on cable at presstv.com, and it was produced by the Iranian government in Tehran. But I used to watch that from time to time over the last several years, and you'd get their perspective. And you say, well, I don't agree with everything they say, but at least you know what they're saying. Well, as of about 3 months ago, that TV channel has been off. So we're not able to get Iranian TV, but because I think this worries me, because I think we're still in the deepest levels of the American government, still haven't settled this thing with the Middle East. So I would urge you to do, we've heard of preemptive strikes. Well, let's do some preemptive peacemaking. Let's get ahead of the curve and get ready for what very well may be continued misunderstanding, continued troubles. There's just too much good money for the arms manufacturers. Frankly, I think the business of arms sales, ginning up this conflict, and money to be made, vast, incomprehensible sums of money to be made selling arms for defending your country and all this kind of baloney. So I think there's a whole convergence of issues which will, sadly, this is not over yet. So I would urge you to do some preemptive peacemaking, do some studying. The other point that I would urge you to think about as a congregation, I would call upon you to urge you, is to have, we said, first of all, to have a conversation with Muslims. The other group I would urge you to consider are the fundamentalists and the evangelicals. When my wife Susan is there in the middle, my dear wife Susan. Susan and I have been driving a bit lately, and there are radio programs. We listen to the radio while you drive, and there are radio programs called family radio, and it appalls me what Christians, the politicization of conservative Christians who, on these issues, they just seem to me to be thoughtless and profoundly unhelpful. And I think they're contributing to our troubles and contributing to a climate of militarism and confrontation when we should be working towards peacemaking, towards understanding each other. So I would call upon the people of this congregation to consider a conversation with conservative Christians. There's so much energy, unthinking support for Israel, uncritical support, just whatever they do is great, let's applaud it. There's unwillingness to think about these issues. So I think we as Mennonites are bridge builders, and I think that we can reach out to the evangelical and fundamentalist Christian world and do some peacemaking just by having conversations in the Christian world. The Protestant world, if you remember your church history, Protestantism split back in the days of the Charles Briggs Bible controversy in 1911, somewhere back there. Biblical interpretation, and the fundamentalists began. Fundamentalism is often used as in Islamic fundamentalism, but fundamentalism is a Protestant phenomenon, and we use that term in these days much more with Islam, but it's really started in Protestantism. So I would call upon you as one possibility for peacemaking is to trust there is a trust in the Mennonite community, I believe, which the evangelical world has, and to be proactive and engage some people and in conversation and see if we can't bring our peacemaking point of view to the table in discussions with the evangelical and fundamentalist world. Yes?
Would you tell us whether you, along with many other groups like Common Humanity, Christian Peacemaker Teams, Mennonite Central Committee, are there a lot of groups like that are working towards peace that you are in connection with, or do you do all these things separately?
Could you say that again to me?
The question was, how connected is Common Humanity to MCC or Christian Peacemaker Teams or other groups, and maybe Mennonite groups or other groups? How do you work together, or are you all doing your own separate thing, or has COVID kind of thrown a wrench in everything? But what are those connections?
We are great friends of all of the groups you mentioned, and whenever it is, we have a chance to work together. But we're a small little group, and we do the best we can. But those are people, we've nurtured those friendships, and would welcome more contact with all of those groups. I think they're all wonderful groups. We have a little niche, which is to helping to see the beauty of those people. So art is our particular niche. But all of those groups, I would like to nurture more contact with those people. So I would welcome more contact. I think we would benefit by additional contact with those people.
One thing that Mel mentioned is connections possibly with the Wichita Islamic Society or Islamic Society of Wichita. have we done that in the past? That's been before my time, but I think there has been some connections with this congregation. I don't know if anybody knows about those or would be willing to share some of what has happened in the past. I think it would be worthwhile to maybe reestablish some connections or reach out, but I'm curious what our connection has been in the past. I saw some nods that we have done something, but maybe it's been a while ago. I know there was a letter sent way back when, I think that maybe when Pastor Heidi was still here, that during some war or something, we tried to express our concern and compassion with Muslims in America, and particularly in Wichita. But yeah, I'm just curious what's happened in the past.
I think in these days of movies, another possibility that we could do for peacemaking is to see movies from that part of the world. Again, we see images of gun-brandishing fighters, the Taliban. Those are terrible images, yes, and they are actually happening, but we don't see the other peaceful images, the human images of the people of the Middle East. So I don't subscribe to Netflix. Susan and I have a little bit of mass media, but not much. But are there movies from the Middle East on Netflix? That would be, or Discovery Channel. Those would be things to really look into. There's a wonderful program, and I can get through some of these points to Nathan. There's a wonderful program called Voices from the Middle East, and they have once a month, they have a movie from the Middle East. And the last time we were there, Susan and I took in The Mayor. The Mayor is an award-winning day in the life kind of movie about the mayor of Ramallah, who happens to be a Christian. And Ramallah is the sort of the unofficial capital of Palestine. That may be putting it too strongly, but it's a very important city in Palestinian leadership. And the mayor, American film crew, followed him for a day and just saw what he's up against. And the end of the movie, the Israeli police arrive mysteriously, and nothing actually happens, but you have that sense of suddenly your office being surrounded by police. A very effective movie. There's another movie that we saw, I think it might have been by the same group, called The Gift. The Gift was mentioned in a big op-ed piece in the Times in which a former head of the CIA said, President Biden, you need to watch this half-hour movie called The Gift. And Susan and I did. It was very moving. It was about a Palestinian father and his daughter trying to bring a little refrigerator home to their humble little apartment. Very profoundly moving. It doesn't sound like much of a movie, but from the premise, but it was really very good. We discovered, and you can find this on our website, if without too much work, you can get Iranian movies. Now we are, as I said, I'm worried about Iran. I don't think this is all over quite yet. The Iranian sensibility, movie-making sensibility, is not at all like the American Hollywood movie-making sensibility. The Iranian movie-making sensibility is sort of like a Mennonite movie-making sensibility. If we were busy in the film media, this may sound strange, but I think the Mennonite Hollywood would be, if you will, producing movies sort of like the Iranians make. There's a tenderness and a kindness and a gentleness and an interest in children and how to grow up and all these wonderful things. So with some effort, you could organize a movie night and see these other parts of the world, which we just don't see in our mainstream media. One more thing, and
Esther had a question back there. You could take the mic to her. But go on, Esther.
So we attended church here briefly in 2013 and 2014, around there. And at that time, 2 Muslim men came up from the Islamic Center and talked to us. I think it was during the Sunday school time. And they were very articulate. I think one of them was a doctor, maybe both of them. And they talked about the Muslim community in Wichita and encouraged us to get to know them. And I don't know, I don't know what was done as a follow-up, but they were very friendly and very engaging and glad for our invitation to come up and speak with them, or speak with us. And around the same time, I was taking a class on diversity at my education degree, and I somehow it fit a requirement for me to go visit the mosque. It was a day that we didn't have school, and neither did my daughter Ani, so I took her with me, and the Muslim school was in session. So we got to sit in. I had my daughter sit in on a few classes while I visited with the principal, and then I visited with the teacher, and it was maybe a 2-hour visit of the school. Ani felt very welcome there and very intrigued by it. And for years, she must have been quite young, because for years after that, she just told me recently that every time we passed the Harley-Davidson place south of Park City, she thought it was the mosque. She got those two buildings mixed up. They were both kind of magnificent, and she thought she was passing the mosque. But in any case, now she knows where it is on K96. We don't go on that road as much, but now she knows where it is. But having her get into the mosque, get into the classrooms, see the children in those classrooms, gives her an awareness, hey, there's diversity in Wichita. There's a community here. And I think, maybe we should do something with our youth group on a day that USD 373 doesn't have school. Take them to the school for a visit. The teacher and the principal there were just bent over backwards with hospitality when we came. They were so welcoming. So I think, if our church, they've come to our space, we need to get into theirs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the Harley-Davidson place is certainly a place of worship for many people. And it would be good for us to get to the Islamic Society.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. I think that's precisely what we should do more of. And we have limited time, limited resources, but let's make the most of the limited time and resources we have. And I think building bridges with across these divides is such a wonderful idea, and I would applaud that and urge you to keep at it. Yeah, sounds like to me like that's a great idea.
I think we'll go on for another 5 or 10 minutes, but just to open it up again for questions or bigger ideas. I think Mel engages peacemaking on small and large scales. I mean, one of my big questions is always, from a American policy standpoint and politics, and also then connecting with peoples and smaller NGOs and that kind of thing, and how do all of those things fit together, or do they? How do we advocate for good policy? How do we also try to make organizations that are helpful or help small organizations such as Common Humanity? So I have that struggle within myself all the time of where do we jump in into this big effort of peacemaking, and on what scale and what level? So I don't know, there's not much of a question there, but I think about that a lot, and you might have thoughts on that. But there might be others too that have specific questions for Mel, or more expansive kinds of questions.
We're also, one last point on my notes here, we're also trying to get together a Christmas and New Year's card exchange, which is something small that you can do, and as soon as I get clarity on that, I will let you folks know. But we had a wonderful Christmas card and New Year's card exchange with Syria 3 years ago. We had Heston Mennonite Church where we spend some time. Folks writing cards to Syria and getting a card back. We had 893 cards. Because of the pandemic, because of this, that, and the other thing, I don't think we can do it with Syria this year, but we're still working on, this being the middle of September, the end of September, we're still working on trying to get something together for this year. And as soon as I know, I will check with, get back in touch with Nathan. But that's another thing that I hope we can get together to, in summary, to bring the humanity of those people. Our organization is called Common Humanity. And we can think about issues, we can think about abstract political issues, but to somehow be touched by another human being, that's the essence of what we're trying to do, and trying to provide opportunities for that. And should this pandemic ever get wrapped up, we're back on the road, and maybe we can bring, who knows, maybe we'll bring some art out this way. That's a little bit of a stretch, but let's keep that in mind. Other questions? I'd love to take some more questions.
I think, Mel's talked some about Common Humanity, but it is commonhumanity.org. There's things happening. That's where you can get posters. There will certainly be updates for this Christmas card idea, and to be following them throughout the this year and in the years to come, I think would be good. It is a nice way of making connections, and the artwork is kind of cool. And if you want a poster, you can put it up somewhere and cut it and tell the story of who the artist is, what the struggles are, what the organization is. That helps to facilitate that, and I think that is helpful. I like to have a visual, and so to me that's a helpful snippet of drawing in our common humanity. And oftentimes, I think particularly in the past, humanitarian work has been based mainly on bringing food and the necessities, and when we only focus on that, we are helping them, and there's this separation. There isn't always a common humanity, and so I think that to focus on the art and what people are trying to say a little bit more deeply is helpful for us and for them. And so I really appreciate that approach, and think it's a good corrective in some ways to how in times people and Americans and American organizations go into countries just to help, and don't see the common humanity, don't even attempt to. So I'm thankful for that. Any final questions or words? One in the back there. Marianne.
I was just reflecting back, and I don't remember how many years ago, but it was during the time that Thompson, her first name,
The bombing.
June Thompson was here.
Oh.
She had a friend who had been, I believe, from around Hillsborough, grew up Mennonite, and had met and got married, became a Muslim, and they live in Wichita. And it was at a time where we were concerned about trying to connect with Muslim people. And it was a group of Muslim women in Wichita, and a number of women from the Newton area would get together to pray for peace. And it was, they had written a joint prayer so that it was not insensitive to either faith. And we had some time in fellowship, and then would have prayer together. It was a good experience, and we were hosted at different places in Wichita, it didn't quite work out. Some reason, I'm not sure why, that anybody else here could host it. The first meeting, we had about, I think, 18, 20 people that would come of different ages, young people and others, and I found that quite exciting. With time, though, it got smaller and smaller, and it sort of seemed like finally the leader, that June's friend, they talked about it, and it was like, are they meeting for our sake, or is it equally as meaningful for them? And it sort of faded out over time. But it was a good effort. That just came to mind, and another way of being able to meet together and realize that we do have common theology and could pray together was great.
Thank you, Mel, for sharing with us this morning, both in the worship time and now. I'm sure that Mel's open to talking with you afterwards if you have particular questions or things you'd like to talk about. Thank you for participating in this, and I hope you have a good, relaxing rest of your Sunday. So go in peace.
Thank you so much. God bless you.